Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This is Jeremy McFarland for the Football is Family podcast. And if there is one team in the NFL who has had an embarrassment of riches for a long period of time, it has to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, it wasn't always this way. At the beginning of the franchise, wins were hard to come by. Yet, through great coaches, draft picks, and lucky breaks, the Steelers turned things around in the 1970s and have held on to being one of the top NFL teams since then. Think about this. Since the 1970 season, 1969-1970 season, the Steelers have had three coaches, Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and Mike Tomlin. Three. In comparison, the New York Jets have had 21 head coaches in that time frame. Now, the Steelers struggled from the time they were founded in the 1930s until around 1969 when Chuck Noll came around. They were once called the Pittsburgh Pirates, named after the baseball team in Pittsburgh. From the 1930s to the 1970s, the Steelers, who had to merge with other teams in two occasions during World War II, they were called the Card Pits and the Steagles, suffered as one of the worst teams in the NFL. Then came Chuck Noll. His leadership and great drafting, his first draft pick was Mean Joe Green, catapulted the Steelers to 4 Super Bowl wins during his coaching run. Following Chuck Noll came Bill Cowher, who led the Steelers to 2 Super Bowls, winning 1. When Chuck Noll retired, Mike Tomlin came in, who also led the Steelers to 2 Super Bowls, winning 1. All in all, the Steelers have played in over 1,000 games with a record as of 2019 of 636 wins, 566 losses, and 22 ties in the regular season, and 36 wins, 25 losses in the postseason. They have appeared in 15 AFC championship games, 8 Super Bowls, with 6 Super Bowl wins. They also boast 24 Hall of Famers, according to Steelers.com/history/Hall of Fame. That's very, very impressive. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. We have a special guest, and I'm going to let him introduce himself in just a moment. If you would like to be a guest on the Football is Family podcast, you can message me on Twitter at Jeremy_McFarland or on the Football is Family podcast Facebook page. Also, hop over to the Sports History Network at sportshistorynetwork.com to look at some of the great podcasts that we have available there. I'd like to welcome everybody back to Football is Family podcast. And I've got a special guest that you might recognize his voice if you listen to the Sports History Network. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Darin Hayes, and I have the Pigskin Dispatch Daily History podcast on Sports History Network.
And right now I am in the pig pen via Zoom, and it actually looks very clean, considering my grandfather used to raise pigs, and I know what they look like. So you actually have a pretty clean pig pen.
Well, you're not seeing the floor, though, are you?
Well, I'm
only seeing the ceiling.
I'll take the ceiling then. Half clean, half dirty. Just. But there's a reason why you're on, and what is that?
Well, I'm here to talk a little bit about the Pittsburgh Steelers, my favorite football team.
See, this is where we're going to have some problems for this year. We're going to have some problems. I joke and kid. Everybody likes what they like, and that's all good. And I was just telling Darin a second ago that my father-in-law was a big Steelers fan. He grew up in Pittsburgh, in that area, and we would have back and forth between him and me when the Titans played Pittsburgh. And one of the memories I have is my wife came up to me and said, I want to buy tickets to the Pittsburgh Titans game. And this was a few years ago. I can't remember when it was. And I said, well, my wife's named Katie. I said, Katie, I work on Sundays. I'm a preacher. I can't go. And she said, I'm not buying it for you. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. So did you grow up in Pittsburgh or in that area?
Well, the pig pen is in Erie, Pennsylvania. And if you look on a map, Erie, Pennsylvania is smack dab in the middle of a triangle, about 100 miles from Buffalo, 100 miles from Cleveland, 100 miles from Pittsburgh.
Okay.
We're right on Lake Erie.
So did you have, are there a lot of Browns and Bills fans in that area?
It's a mixture. It depends, who's playing well. Everybody's playing well this year, so there's a lot of fans from all the three teams this year.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about the Browns either. So you grew up. What got you to start liking the Steelers?
Well, I sort of my father grew up. He was born in the 40s, and he grew up in the 50s. And there was no Buffalo Bills then. It was just the Browns and the Steelers. And everybody in our area was Browns fans because they were pretty good.
Yeah, they were.
They were outstanding, as a matter of fact. Go back to their AAFC days and their early NFL days. They were outstanding. They were probably the team to beat. So my dad went into service, and before he went into service, he was tired of everybody being Browns fans. He said, these poor Steelers, nobody likes them. He goes, I'm going to support them. And my grandfather did too. They sort of both teamed up on that. And then when the 70s came, about the time I was getting ready to start watching football, that's when they started getting pretty good. The Steel Curtain was coming along, and those early 70s games, and the mid and late 70s, they were outstanding. So that's sort of my story, how I became a Steelers fan.
Well, for what I understand about the and Michael McCambridge, and I'm pointing back here somewhere, he wrote an amazing book about the history of the NFL, America's Game. And from reading his book and reading as well Joe Horgan's book on the NFL Century, what I understand about the Steelers from the 40s and 50s is just they were not good at all.
No, I think maybe they had one or two winning seasons from 1933 when they came about, which the first 2 years they were called the Pittsburgh Pirates, because like all the NFL teams, baseball was big. So the NFL football teams tried to go on the shirt tails of the baseball teams to get some popularity. So the Steelers were actually the Pirates their first 2 years in existence.
Did they have the same colors as they do now?
I believe so. It's hard to tell in those black and white pictures, though, right?
Well, yeah. I think that the Steelers and the Pirates both have the same color schemes. I'm not certain on that.
Yeah, they're pretty much the same. The black and the canary yellow, or black and gold, some people call it.
I'm glad that you can tell difference color. It just looks to me.
I'm just going. I think the Steelers official site says they're canary yellow. If I'm not mistaken.
Yellow.
I believe so.
I'm going to have to start calling yellow canary yellow and see what people say about that around here. So during this time, and when you look at the history of the Steelers, there were some major moves in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s that changed the way that the Steelers played, and their appearance. And what do you think some of the most important moves that they made back then?
Well, probably the biggest one that changed the whole culture was probably the hiring of Chuck Noll. I believe he was like 1968, somewhere thereabouts. And his number one draft pick in his very first draft was Mean Joe Green. And that's a big culture change right there when you have somebody that's a dominant player on one side of the ball. And, of course, they just started picking up the pieces, had a really good draft, I believe, in 73 when they had 3 or 4 Hall of Famers in that one draft. And it just sort of set the ball rolling and took them to success there in the 70s.
Well, did that make Pittsburgh a football town in that time?
Well, I think Pittsburgh's always been somewhat of a football town. I mean, the very first professional football game was played in Pittsburgh. I mean, Pudge Heffelfinger was with the Allegheny Athletic Club, and they were playing, I believe, Jeanette, which those are 2 suburbs of Pittsburgh. So it was pretty big. And then sort of pro football went away from the Pittsburgh area and the Pennsylvania area and went sort of the Ohio Valley, state of Ohio, Michigan. That's where the early NFL teams were. Pittsburgh and Philadelphia both came in 1933, and it was because of the Sunday blue laws were lifted in Pennsylvania. Before that, nobody was allowed to, you weren't allowed to play a football game on Sunday in Pennsylvania law. 1933, the NFL sort of got wind that, they're going to let this law go away. And so Pittsburgh and Philadelphia both got a franchise that year.
Okay, keep going.
And Art Rooney Sr., who they called the Chief, he was that very initial owner of the Steelers. I believe he invested like $5,000 to the NFL, and they gave him a franchise. Well, and, he had some rocky times in those first couple years. I mean, there's some stories, and I don't know the total validity of, but I've read a lot about it, where he was up at a racetrack up in Saratoga, up in New York, it's upper state New York, with one of the Mr. Mara that owned the Giants. And he ended up winning a horse race that ended up paying his payroll for a couple years in the Steelers. They were hurting pretty bad. They were thinking about disbanding after a few years, and supposedly he won this horse race for like $35,000. It paid the payroll of the Steelers in the in the mid 1930s, and kept the franchise going.
So if you're a Steelers fan, you need to thank the Saratoga racetrack.
Yeah, I believe so.
Now, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia are obviously in the same state, but on different sides.
Correct.
Is there I know there's a rivalry in the AFC North big time between Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. I guess Cincinnati's involved somewhere. And they will be once Joe Burrow is back healthy. But is there a big rivalry?
Used to be your Titans too. The Titans and the Oilers were humongous rivals.
I always thought how weird how the divisions were set up back then, but I think they're better now. I still don't know why the Dallas Cowboys are in the East, but anyway. Is there a big rivalry between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia?
There is. They only play once every 4 years, I believe. So it's not. They played this past year, and there was a little bit of rivalry for bragging rights. Sometimes some of the politicians, the mayor of Philadelphia will have a little side bet with the mayor of Pittsburgh. From what I read, something going to charity or something or other. I'm not exactly sure what they bet on this year, but it's a little bit of rivalry. But the big ones are. The Browns, the Ravens, who are the old Browns. That's the big ones. And it used to be those Oilers years,
Yeah, if it wasn't for the Steelers in the 70s, Houston probably would still have the Oilers.
It's possible.
Yeah, I think that it was the Steelers that knocked out the Oilers at least a couple of times in the championship games or in the playoffs, and those Oiler teams could have won Super Bowls. They were that good.
Yeah, they were very good.
So you've had in the last 50 years an embarrassment of riches. Just embarrassing how good your teams have been.
That's true. And we're very blessed.
You've had what, 3 coaches?
I'm 54, and I can only remember 3 coaches.
Okay.
So
3 coaches. My Titans have had 3 coaches in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And you understand how that works. So you had Chuck Noll, Hall of Famer.
Yes.
You had Bill Cowher, Hall of Famer.
Yes.
Now, what do you think about your current coach?
I think he's great. I mean, he is – I don't know if you've ever seen him in an interview, but that man is probably one of the best wordsmiths I've ever seen. He comes up with terms that, on the fly for questioning, like on his press conferences every week they're just unbelievable. If anybody out there gets an opportunity to hear Mike Tomlin speak, I mean, it's quite an enjoyable experience to hear him and how he dances through the media.
What I like about him, about Tomlin, is he looks like he could suit up and run out and play, number one. But how he took his team from last year to this year, and he didn't make one change or hardly any changes. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger's playing, but they didn't make the playoffs, to making the playoffs, and not only making the playoffs, but maybe a first seed. That tells you something about Tomlin.
It does. And I mean, I believe Well, I think he's been the coach for 14, 15 years now with the Steelers. Never had a losing season. And you lose your starting quarterback, and a lot of times last year they were on their fourth-string quarterback.
Yes, they were.
And they ended up 500. That's the worst they've ever been in the Mike Tomlin era. I think they've had 2 or 3 seasons where they were 8-8. So and that's quite a testament with the different teams that they've had over those 15 years too.
It is. Now, if you were to say you're going to start a team today, you're going to restart the Steelers today, and you had a chance to pick between Roethlisberger or Terry Bradshaw, I mean, who would you go with?
In this day and age, you got to go with Roethlisberger. I mean, I think he's much better pocket presence. He's had success throughout his career. Bradshaw, early in his career, was in and out of the starting lineup. And the Steelers had a couple of good quarterbacks back then when Terry first came on in the early 70s. You had Terry Hanratty from Notre Dame and Joe Gilliam, who was they were all different, had different traits that really made them, each one of them shine in different ways. And Bradshaw sort of caught on. He would be in the lineup for a couple games, not have a good game. They'd pull and put Hanratty or Gilliam in, and they'd go through all 3 quarterbacks there in the early 70s. And finally, Bradshaw latched on that starting job, and he played well. But even in the really good teams, there was games where you'd sit there and go, "Oh my gosh, Terry, what are you doing?" You know, he had some really good talent around him too. Where Roethlisberger, he has great talent, had some great wide receivers over his career, but there's been times where he hasn't had a whole lot to throw to, or hasn't had a running game. Like this year, the running game is not real strong, and he's doing a lot with his arm, and he's done that a lot in his career. And I think the way the game has evolved, the way it is today, passing, teams will pass more than they'll run. Back in the 70s when Bradshaw played, he had Rocky Bleier and Franco Harris in the backfield. Both of them one season had 1,000 yards in 14-game seasons back then. So
now I'm probably stepping on some sacredness here, but was the Immaculate Reception legal?
To tell you the truth, I mean, it's hard to tell because the camera footage, you can't tell. I mean, I like to look at it. Does it really matter?
See, that comes from a Steelers fan right there. No, what I understand is in the rules in the 70s, the receiver cannot touch the ball. If a receiver touches the ball and his teammate gets it, it's incomplete.
That's correct.
So it had to be the defensive player touching the ball, and then Franco Harris could scoop it. But the very fact that Franco Harris was right there to get the ball tells me that he was paying attention.
I believe so. And if you watch that play, he's sort of trying to run like a chip block, and then he sort of goes down a couple yards downfield. And that pass gets thrown, had to be 20-some yards downfield. So Franco must have released when that pass went past him just to go down to, hit a blocker or something, or go down to, see what activity was there going down there. And the ball comes to him at his ankles. He catches it and runs down the sideline. And, through River Stadium's in pandemonium. I believe that was the first year the Steelers were in the playoffs too.
I believe it was. That year, I want to say that the Raiders probably had the best team that they ever had. And knocking them out like that. I watched a documentary on the person who has that football. Have you seen that one?
I've seen the one with Peyton Manning's on Peyton's Places. He has a pretty good.
Okay, I didn't see that one. It was another one, and they said that he has it locked up in a vault.
Yes. Peyton Manning goes into the vault with him, and they look at the football. Peyton Manning has a whole show on ESPN Plus for those of you that have that. And it's the last season, to celebrate the 100th year of football of the NFL. And it's a whole episode on the Immaculate Reception. And it was pretty incredible. And at the end, they had all the players that were involved. They had Terry Bradshaw, Franco Harris, Frenchie Fuqua from the Steelers, and the Raiders linebacker, name escapes me. Last name starts with a V.
I know who he is. He was when they talk about it, they always have him on there, and he's complaining.
He got clipped on the run back, as he's saying. But they ended up getting actors to go out and try to replicate that pass. And actually, the quarterback, it's interesting, the quarterback they have is playing Bradshaw's part. And these guys are the old football players. They're sitting off on the sideline watching with Peyton Manning. And the quarterback that's representing Bradshaw, his arm gets so tired because they keep trying to throw it and make the ball do what it did in the film clip. So Peyton Manning has to go in there and start throwing, playing the part of Bradshaw. They couldn't replicate it. So what their premise was there is that it had to be the defender for the Raiders, and I can't remember if it might have been Lester Hayes.
Yes.
Had to hit the ball at some point. Definitely hit Fuqua, but it had to hit the Raider defender also to get propelled backwards like it did.
Do you think that our current system could have overturned that?
I think we would have had a lot more cameras angles on it. Had some better footage on it. I mean, remember, instant replay, the first time instant replay ever happened was like in the mid-'60s. This is 1972, 1973. So it's only 10 years when television started using instant replay. I think it was the Army-Navy game on 1963 is when they first tried to use it, right after JFK was assassinated.
Yeah, it was. They said that the machine was so big, it took so long to replay things. It was pretty rough. I mean, today we have where you press a button, it goes back. It's easy,
right?
So if you had a top 4 to put on Mount Rushmore for the Steelers, anybody? Okay, you got about 90 years worth of history, roundabout.
Right.
Who would you have up there? Who would you have up there?
Oh boy, for players or coaches?
This is your game. This is your Mount Rushmore. I give you Arnie gives the keys to his DeLorean. I give you a chisel and a hammer for your Mount Rushmore.
Well, I'm gonna go with players, but if I was gonna do one properly, I'd probably do a coaches, owners Mount Rushmore, and I'd do a players Mount Rushmore.
Okay.
I mean, definitely Art Rooney Sr. on the coaches and
you have to add
owners.
The cigar. You have to add the cigar.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You got to have a big cigar coming out there. You have to have a great rock formation for that. And then the 3 coaches that I know: Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin, because I think they each brought something to their teams that made them top of the league. And at one point a champion.
Yes.
And if you go to players, I would go to players that had an impact on the whole franchise. Mean Joe Green, definitely. I mean, something changed when they drafted him. I think Jack Lambert, something changed even a little bit more when they got Jack Lambert in that outstanding draft they had. It just gave the defense even more tenacity. You already had Mean Joe, but somebody in the middle that was, almost, Dick Butkus, like he was just a mean guy when he was on the football field. And Troy Polamalu, another time, where Steelers were mediocre at best, you get Troy Polamalu. He made a difference to that. And quarterbacks had to worry about him every play when he was on the field. And then I think that
chisel out his hair too, by the way.
Yeah, you would. Maybe plant some trees or something.
Yeah, there you go.
And and then I think that 4th player would be Ben Roethlisberger, because 17 years and he's still playing at a pretty high level. I think he's definitely made a difference in the franchise. I mean, there's a lot of franchises who love to have a quarterback that's been that long, that consistent.
You know what makes me respect, and I give people like what they like, and I give people a hard time, but they give me it's a game. We enjoy it. But what I respect most about the Rooneys is, and I believe they were the first ones to do this, and I can't place my finger. I think it was in the NFL Century book by Joe Horgan. I saw this, that it was either the chief or his son who basically signed a black man to go and interview and scout historically black colleges.
I believe was that Bill Nance, I believe? Is that?
I apologize for not knowing the name off the top of my head.
I think that's who. Maybe I'm wrong. I know he's up for the Hall of Fame this year, and his name escapes me right offhand. But you're right. He went to the predominantly black colleges of the South, and that's where people like Mel Blount came from, John Stallworth.
Yes.
I mean, those teams of the '70s were built on that.
What you have
the scouting.
With him, with Vince Lombardi, with Bear Bryant.
Bill Nunn is his name. I'm sorry.
That's
Bill
it.
Nunn.
That's it. Yes.
Bill Nunn.
And actually, if I remember correctly, Bill Nunn went to, was it his son, the chief's son, and said, "You need somebody here." And I think that Bill Nunn was offered the job, right? It shows that those men that I mentioned, that color didn't matter. It was talent and ability to win a game. And in the 60s and the 70s, that was not heard of in a lot of places around the country.
No, you're right. Especially those colleges they weren't the Alabamas and the Notre Dames of the football landscape in college either. They were, Jackson State and, some other colleges that were a little bit smaller, probably right on the verge of being like Division 1AA or Division 2 even. That's the colleges that he went into and found these, raw players that nobody had heard of. And it was interesting. I think it was John Stallworth that what they did back then is they would get the reel-to-reel tape on them, and they'd go in the film room and watch tape on them. And Bill Nunn was supposed to pass it on to another team when he watched Stallworth's team. Well, he supposedly he conveniently lost the tape for like a couple of weeks, and then the draft came, and the Steelers got John Stallworth. That's allegedly how the story goes, something along those lines.
There is probably some truth to that. A lot of people have said that Stallworth was the best wide receiver that the Steelers had during the 70s. And I see a lot of that as just pure catching ability, maybe not as athletic. But looking at how the Rooney family was able to see, what do we need to do to win? Color doesn't matter. Nationality doesn't matter. Franco Harris was Italian.
Yes.
Italian background.
Right.
Location of a person doesn't matter. We're going to meld them together and we're going to make a winner. And they did. That's
Absolutely.
What's so special about that team is that, and you have a history with your team that maybe the Packers have. The Browns back in the 40s and 50s had. The 49ers in the 80s had. But what you have since the 70s is you have almost consistency from that point on.
And I think it starts with the Rooney family. I mean, their philosophy is they're going to do their due diligence when they hire a coach. And when they hire that coach, he's for the long term. They're going to have patience with them. I mean, Bill Cowher wasn't a great coach when he first started out. The Steelers struggled a little bit. And, we Steeler fans, we just came off of a decade earlier winning, 4 Super Bowls with Chuck Noll. And you're sitting there, this man's retired. And now this other guy comes in that came from the Browns. He was a Browns player, Bill Cowher was, even though he was originally from Pittsburgh. And I believe he was on the Browns coaching staff when the Steelers hired him. And, everybody, I can remember being up in arms, and as soon as something bad went wrong, oh my gosh, what did they do? We need Chuck Noll back. But the Rooneys are so patient, and they don't really say boo about when their coaches are not performing up to standards. Or some franchises, that gentleman's gone as soon as he has a couple bad games. The Rooneys are very patient, and they know what they want, and they know what they look for in a coach, and that's really a testament to the family philosophy. The last 3 Rooneys that have been in charge have all done that.
Now here's I'll leave you with this. I didn't realize this until I watched the 30 for 30, and I guess I should have realized this, but there was the 30 for 30 about from LA to Marino.
Okay.
And I didn't realize it, but there was a chance that Dan Marino in 1983 would have gone to the Pittsburgh Steelers. It would have gone to the Steelers and been their quarterback, and they didn't take him. Now, can you imagine 1983, you get this guy from Pittsburgh. I think he grew up in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, he did. He grew right up in a suburb of Pittsburgh.
And he would have been
Pittsburgh Central Catholic was his high school, and he went to Pitt.
And the Rooneys would have known him for a very long time. Can you imagine what that would have been like for the Steelers as of right now, you're not talking, 6 Super Bowls? You're talking multiple, a lot more than that.
Absolutely. I can remember in the early 90s when every time Marino's contract would be coming up, there was always rumors going around all Western Pennsylvania that, Steelers going to do some trade or do some deal and get Marino. And that went through more than a handful of times I can remember. And we'd all get excited about, oh my gosh, we get Dan Marino. But Marino really out of college really wasn't as highly regarded as what he ended up being. I forget who got drafted. There's a couple quarterbacks ahead of him that got drafted that I forget who was in that class.
There was one that the Jets got, and then
Eason? Was Eason
yes.
in?
I want to say named Ken Eason. I'm not.
Yeah,
Ken
O'Brien maybe. Maybe it was Ken O'Brien even.
But the Jets got one, and then of course the Steelers ended up getting the linebacker that was hurt in a car wreck.
Yes.
So
Rivera.
The Dolphins for 15, 16, 17 years are just thinking they're lucky stars that the Steelers did not pick up. But I'm just saying that you had a chance in 1983 to pick up the successor for Terry Bradshaw. Can you imagine what that would have been like?
Oh, it would have been great. but of course it could have changed things the way the Steelers are today, though. You never know how those things impact,
It's kind of like that.
I mean,
the butterfly flaps his wings in China. You don't know.
Right. I mean, because look what it did to the Dolphins. They had Marino for so long. They really didn't have any successor to Marino till possibly now they do with Tua, but they really didn't have anything substantial in between that they was their franchise quarterback. And that could have been the Steelers too. So you think about that. You never know.
Well, if I leave you with this, my friend Darin, and thank you again for giving us your time today. You have a chance to go back in history and take one thing for your collection. I got a lot of junk in my office right here that's special to me, but nothing game. But you had a chance to go back and get something either game worn or game used. I mean, even get the jersey from the Coca-Cola commercial with Mean Joe.
Oh, that'd be a good
awesome
one, huh?
I want to say that young man, well, I don't think he's so young anymore, but he still has it. It's framed and signed. He loves it. What would you take?
I tell you what, there's a lot of things that have happened in Steeler history. I'll tell you what, I'd maybe take the football from one of my favorite plays as a Steeler fan. And it happened in the Super Bowl when James Harrison picked off that Kurt Warner pass at the goal line right at the end of the half and went 100 yards basically to change the whole structure of the way that game was going. Because the Cardinals were starting to roll there at the end of that half. And when he picked that off, and just to see how gassed he was and how excited everybody was, I'd want that football, I think.
He needed CPR after that, I would say. I watched him work out, and that dude can bench press a bus, but he doesn't have a lot of cardio.
No, that's for sure.
Well, again, thank you. And again, what is your podcast, and where can we see you on Twitter?
We're at Pigskin Dispatch. We also have website pigskindispatch.com, and the name of the podcast is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch podcast.
Now,
I found it on Sports History Network.
This podcast is quickly turned to one of my favorites because, number one, it deals with history, but also the way that you present it. It's not just I'm reading off stats. You put life into it that
thank you.
That I enjoy, and that I have myself sent it out to several of my friends here in Tennessee.
I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem. And I enjoy talking with you, and we will have you on in the AFC Championship game when my Titans beat your Steelers, and we will talk about how I could send you the my father-in-law gave me I got two things Steeler-wise.
Okay.
Two things. I have over here a little mini helmet, but I also have one of the original terrible towels. And it has been used. But I'll send it to you to help wipe away your tears if you need it. And you might have to send it to me to wipe away my tears. You never know. But
I wish I had a Love You Blue or something signed to send you.
I have looked for those. eBay does not have them.
No, huh? God, there was thousands of them in the stands.
They're probably all on the ground, but I have up on my up here in my office. It took me years to find it, but the AFC Championship hat, I found one, and no one wore it. It wasn't worn, so it was relatively new. So you can find things on eBay, but eventually I'll find one of those.
No, that'd be a good catch for you.
Well, Darin, you take it easy, and I appreciate your time.
Well, I thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
No problem.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.